Welcome back to another week of Let's Discuss with Meg Duke, where we discuss some things perinatal and all things mental health. I am so excited this week. We have Dr. B. He's a husband, father of 6 young children, and a board-certified pediatrician in Lincoln, Nebraska. He and his patients thrive in a personalized, relaxed atmosphere where he can take time to get to know them and answer all their little and big questions. He loves being a text message away from helping a new dad facing his baby's first fever or a seasoned mom who needs tips for dealing with her middle schooler's behavior. Dr. B, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. That's a really good introduction. I feel like that is really well written. I don't know where you got that, but
It's from your website.
Are you serious? From my website? Okay, cool. Well, that's a really good introduction. I didn't even know it was there. I must have written that at some point in the past, or somebody did, but I like it. Thank you.
I liked it too. That's why I was like, hey, this will work if that works for you. So I always like to kick off by asking people how we know each other. But in the cases where I DM somebody on Instagram, that is the answer. And I will answer that for you.
There we go.
That's how I introduce myself to you. Yeah.
Yes, I've seen your stuff on Instagram as well. So Instagram fans back and forth.
Thank you. Love that. So I was curious, what got you interested in pediatric medicine?
I have always liked, well, a couple of different things. Like when I was going through medical school, at first I was into, like, I don't know how old you are, but House MD was a big thing. And he was a pediatric, or he was an infectious disease doctor. So I was like, oh, that'd be so cool, solving medical sort of mysteries, CSI sort of ish. But then as I got into it, I realized that I really liked the issues that children face in terms of the physical health medical issues that children face. And I found that I really liked working with families too. And so that kind of led me down the pediatrics route rather than the adult medicine route. And then what led me into general pediatrics is being able to form those relationships with families and see them over the long term and watch their children grow up and help them as they're navigating all the things that parents do while they're raising their families.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm wondering, are you happy in a post-quarantine world that you didn't go down the road of infectious diseases? Would that have been something even more energizing for you?
I feel like that would have been even more challenging. I know I have a lot of friends that were in the mix of all the, learning things in even more to greater depth, or, having to figure out lots of hospital protocols and everything like that. So I was a little bit sheltered from all of that and got to focus on my patients and my own family and those sorts of things, which was great in the midst of all the pandemic and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, you said infectious disease, and of course my mind went straight to COVID. So I was like, yes, that is yes, absolutely. So then I was wondering if you could explain to our listeners the difference between kind of a typical practice and what you all do at Frontier.
So our practice, so a typical practice that you would, see in every town across the country, you go in for your visits and you, it may be a checkup, it may be a sick visit, you pay your copay if it's a sick visit, insurance gets billed, then you pay the difference if you haven't met your deductible yet. Our practice, we do a monthly membership fee, which then covers everything that one needs, regardless of if it's a sick visit, if it's a well visit, if you just want to come in and talk about your kids' lack of needing to sleep and how it's really difficult for you and you want to figure out some like behavioral strategies, or if you want to talk about whatever it might be on your mind, we just do a membership fee that covers everything. And so it's kind of like a gym membership. So at a gym membership, you can go as often as you want. You don't have to pay every time you go in. You don't get bills, later in the month or anything like that. Or like Blockbuster versus Netflix, like you can watch as much Netflix as you want. So that's kind of how our practice works. And it's a new model called direct primary care. And it's something that's been catching on around the country because people are kind of fed up with the way insurance works and looking for other options for their family. And a lot of busy families, they have employer sponsored insurance that they have a really high deductible. And so they never meet their deductible and they're paying $500, $700 for every sick visit plus ear infection sort of that they go through. And so this different model works really well for families that face those sort of healthcare challenges.
I know you posted recently, and I've seen I remember there was a meme a while ago about like, this was obviously in the hospital, but like that the insurance charged somebody for a nurse handing them their baby
Right. All sorts
and
of charges like that. Yeah.
and I know you posted something recently too, where it was like, I can't remember what the list was, but it was just like some of the things where you're like, wait, somebody charged me for that and that and that. And it's things that we don't think
Right.
about from a medical billing perspective.
It's like everything that could possibly be coded gets coded. I mean, I think it was crying. I posted once about somebody, or I shared once somebody's meme of that they got a bill because they cried at their doctor's office because then they had an emotional assessment done or something like that. And the hospital of the like $10 Tylenol dose or something along those lines.
Right.
Like it's just you don't realize how broken the system is, the healthcare insurance system, until you're on the outside of it and you don't have to get all these permissions to do the simplest things for your families. And then it just becomes so much better for me and for my patients.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that really is nice to hear. That's a really nice thing. I know we've got some people in the area that offer that here in the Kansas City area, which I had
Yeah.
never really heard of before. And then of course I was following you and I was like, oh, that sounds nice just to be a text message away.
Yes, totally. Bloom is in Kansas City, in the Kansas City area, and she's fantastic. And Lauren Hughes is her name. Dr. Hughes gave me lots of tips and strategies when I was starting out because she was a pioneer before me.
Yes, and Dr. Hughes also a guest on Let's Discuss with Meg Duke. So
Mm-hmm.
small little world there.
It
So I
is.
was
Yep.
curious, and I think the main overarching theme of our conversation today is going to be about social media. And
Uh-huh.
I'm really excited about that. I was curious, kind of to tip it off, how has social media impacted the mental health of our children and, you know, young adults, teens, younger people in the most recent years?
I think I don't think anybody was prepared for the effect that social media would have on our children and teens and families because there's never been anything like it before.
Right.
And so it's not been something that any of us as parents faced when it came to raising their children. I mean, I got AOL Instant Messenger when I was like in high school,
Yes.
and that was the social media of the day then, which really wasn't because it was just conversations back and forth. It was just like DMs essentially, but you didn't have a view into everybody else's world. I do remember like personalizing my AOL profile sort of thing and trying to,
Yes.
code in colors and um, all sorts of music and things into that.
And he had to come up with a really fancy or a pithy or like a quippy away message, right?
Oh my gosh, the away messages. Yes,
Yes.
I could go on and on about the away messages because
Oh,
you wanted
yes.
to include some dashboard confessional song lyrics or something that was really really spoke to you that made people wonder what you were doing that was so cool that you couldn't be available for them to chat with.
Yes.
But I think what I've seen with social media is that there haven't been any upsides from our teens experiencing social media, and there's certainly none compared to the downsides that we see. Bullying, body image issues, all sorts of issues when it comes to worsening anxiety about the state of our world because it's so much more readily available without filter, and you don't see the good, you see the bad. And so all of those things are amplified by social media. And it's something where it's on such a small little device that the child, teen, adolescent, whomever can do anywhere, that there's very little for a parent to do when it comes to trying to intercede, monitor, or regulate what their child is seeing, experiencing, or how they're being treated online. There's just not a good way for a parent to sit by their side and do it in a way that makes it a safe option for kids and teens.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because you mentioned that too, as soon as you were talking about kind of the readily accessible scope of the world. And it does really force children to grow up faster. I think about the ignorance is bliss of childhood, right? Where, you're in elementary school, junior high, and you're not really worried about what's going on in Syria and the earthquakes or,
Right.
and not to say that obviously that's sitting in a place of privilege to be able to not have to worry about,
Sure.
for example, the earthquakes in Syria. But those are also things that perhaps an 11-year-old doesn't really need to be focusing on. And yet that
Right.
is right there in the palm of their hand, with access. And like you said, too, with very little abilities for parents. Certainly there are certain options for controls, but also not a lot for parents to do in that regard.
Right. I think too, when you think about the amount of exposure, like, yes, it's good for children to learn about the world, learn about what's going on in the world, and know about those things and be wise and, grateful for the things that you have and all those sorts of things. But the fire hose volume of getting that information is a lot for us as adults to take in. I mean,
Yes.
just in the past 24 hours, how many shootings have been all over, like, of unarmed people, and I'm getting exposed to that, and that is struck you very locally, I know.
I was going to say right here in KC-Mo. Well, I'm on the Kansas side, but yes, right here.
Yep.
Mm.
Hearing about all of those things on such a regular basis is very different from having them filtered down to you through parents, through teachers, even just through the newspaper. Like, you're just constantly overwhelmed with bad. And as adults, we struggle with that. And I know lots of parents that I talk with, in person or through social media and those sorts of things, that really struggle with the constant barrage of news, negativity, anxiety producing things. And then we're exposing a 12-year-old to all of those things on a regular basis, and expecting them to be able to cope and handle that, in addition to just all the normal 12, 14, 16-year-old things that make it hard to be those ages.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is a good way of looking at it too, right? Like that distilled down, even as adults, like the 10 o'clock news, right? We were able to get it in a space. I mean, predates me. I was the iPhone came out of right after I graduated college, but still, like, I remember growing up being in a space where it was like, you didn't really hear about things until the end of the day and kind of, and so now it's like, yeah, it is. I like how you express the fire hose of it all. And we know the only cure for overwhelm is nothingness. And since we are almost incapable of putting our phones down, we don't really get to experience a lot of nothingness. So we're just piling onto the overwhelm, onto the overwhelm, onto the overwhelm. And how do we take some time to process that? And again, I like to really acknowledge, like, I'm 37. How do we expect 13-year-olds to deal with that?
Right. Yeah, I don't think it's fair to do that, and I don't think it's something that's healthy for kids to be have that thrust upon them because they don't know, and they shouldn't know, and we as adults know better, and still, like you said, spend way too much time on our phones, doom scrolling and all those things, despite the fact that we know how bad it is for us, and how it affects our mental health. We still open Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, wherever, and scroll, and it's just so pervasive, and it's hard. I mean, I'll catch myself walking up the stairs, like literally just walking up the stairs in our house, pulling my phone out because I'm walking, and I have like 12 seconds to walk up the stairs, and I'll just see what's going on my phone.
Yes, we are programmed.
Yeah, totally.
It's funny, I was talking about that with a client, and I obviously won't give any other identifying information except for the discussion because it was something that I brought up, but about the access to our phone, where, one of my favorite TV shows, one of my sign-offs is from Ted Lasso. It's one of my favorite TV shows of all time. And I even catch myself in, like, I don't want to say slower moments because Ted Lasso is majestic and perfectly written, but in like less active moments, being just like reaching over mindlessly and picking up my phone and starting to scroll. And I'm like, you care so much about this TV show and what's going on. Why are you scrolling Instagram? But it is just the natural, like, it's the ritual, it's the programming of it all.
Totally. I mean, they make money because they keep you on there and coming back there for more dopamine. And because of that, like, I mean, they have it down to a science. And so of course you're going to do it, and it's going to be outside of your control. As a person with a fully developed brain who understands the risks and ramifications, and then expecting a 13-year-old to be able to understand those same things is just way too much that they should have to, have upon them to monitor and manage that.
Absolutely, yeah. I heard somewhere that there is a function on if I have an iPhone where if you turn the color filters off, because apparently the colors of it all is supposed to be
Hmm,
what helps the dopamine be released. And so every
interesting.
so often I'll put it on that gray scale and be like, okay, I actually need to look at my phone right now for something, but don't enjoy it.
I'll try that. I hadn't heard that. I'll look into that. I'll try that one.
Yeah, I think it's like a triple click on the side and it pops up with like, there's like a guided access. So I'm gonna do it
Hmm.
right now while I'm on here. Let's see, it is, oh, well, yeah, oh, well, I'm not gonna show you. But anyway, it's so usually it's turns gray.
I see. Cool. I'll try it.
Yeah. Sorry, I have pictures of my kids on my phone, so I gotta cover that up. But yeah, so yeah, so I just think it's really interesting how you're describing, right? Like we're unintentionally or ignorantly, even we don't know, we're asking a lot of our children by allowing them access to these things because it's like, oh, well, but now we're starting to really understand the difference. And as we as adults have to be the ones to set that boundary and to be the ones to understand, like, we have to be trying to find ways to protect the children and their
Right.
access. Yeah. I know you posted, sorry, I keep mentioning Instagram, but I obviously read a lot of your Instagram. You posted, are you getting a lot of questions about people linking autism to social media and screen time?
I've had a couple people ask recently, more so, in the early childhood age, or they've been made to feel like their child was diagnosed with autism, and then there was lots of, well, how much screen time have you let them have? And a lot of things along those lines that have made them feel a lot of guilt
Mhm.
about the screen time that they've, allowed their child to have. And that played a role in it, or just kind of even the lines of questioning that they were asked when being evaluated, or being told you can't give them screen time or something like that, that it made them feel like they were contributing to it through episodes of Bluey or something like that.
Okay,
So
we could go on a whole separate podcast about Bluey because
sure.
it is 7 minutes. It is digestible. It is like, hey, we have a couple minutes before we have to go. Do you all want to watch an episode of Bluey? Like, and the topic,
Right.
I don't, they must have either parents or mental health professionals or all of the above on that writing staff because it hits such
I
specific
imagine they do. They
things
have a good,
and
yep.
it's validating. Like if you've ever looked in the back seat of their car, I promise to stop talking about Bluey after this, but in the back seat of the car, there are like chip crumbs and stickers and
Hmm.
crayon marks and stuff. And it's like, oh, other people with children have messy back seats of their car. How validating, how liberating for me to see.
Well, there's one episode where they're playing hide and seek, and they find the dad in the closet, hiding, just scrolling on his phone, and it's like that seems like something that I
Yes,
would I would find myself doing during hide and seek, is hiding in the closet, playing on my
yes,
phone, enjoying
yes.
the downtime.
Yes, absolutely right. Like a moment of peace. Nobody
Yeah,
needs anything from me for the next 7 minutes or however long
right,
hide and seek
right.
takes. So I was curious, what are like, are there any APA recommendations for children at certain age groups and how closely we should adhere to those for how much screen time or kind of what your
Right.
thoughts were on that?
In the past, there hasn't been any big updates from the American Academy of Pediatrics along the lines of, how much screen time. Decades probably ago now, there was this 2 hour idea, and it doesn't quite work for families. It doesn't really make sense to me from a general guideline of 2 hours, because the quality of screen time can vary dramatically when we're talking about putting them in front of the TV of Cocomelon for 2 hours versus doing a couple episodes of Bluey, some interactive games on their phone, some watching a show or movie or something with a parent or loved one or caregiver. There's such a difference in the quality of the engagement that I don't think that you can just say there's blanketly a 2 hour screen time limit that should be adhered to, especially in the world where kids go to school and they're on their Chromebooks or they're on their iPads during the school day, and
Yes,
then they come
yeah.
home and they have to do work on that. Well, that doesn't really work for that 2 hour arbitrary amount of time. And so what I generally tell parents, first and foremost, is the quality of the material matters, the engagement level of the child and the engagement level of the caregiver matters more than the specific number of minutes or hours.
Sure.
Um, And I also try and give parents a little bit of permission to, if you just need a break, if you just need to make dinner and have a little space, or just, everybody is having a tough time and you want
Yes.
to put on a little Bluey or something like that, it's not the end of the world. You know, to beat yourself up, because I think that's something too, that a lot of the guidelines are very kind of like paternalistic about it, and make people feel like it's giving your kid cupcakes and drugs or something like that.
Yeah.
When really, I think that if we were a little bit more gentle on people when it comes to screen time, they probably wouldn't turn to it as a vice so much, or make it feel like it's a vice, and they would just use it as a tool,
Yes.
realizing that it's not a tool for everything, but it can be helpful for some things. It can be helpful to engage with your child. It can be helpful to spark conversations. It can be helpful so that you can use the restroom in peace, or make dinner without everybody melting down. Like, those are fine things to use screen time for. It's not as big of a deal as it's made out to be. And so I think there's an ongoing balance, but the less that you beat yourself up about it, probably the faster you'll find that balance, and the more easy of a time you'll have with the balance.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I feel like where there can be helpful things in the world for adults, normalizing certain things in parenthood and whatnot, there is a lot of judgment that goes along with that. Perhaps the pendulum is
Oh, for
definitely
sure.
farther than that. So it's nice to be able to clarify, like, this whole episode is not like, don't put screens in front of your kids, you're a horrible parent. No, absolutely not. Like, I remember before I had kids, a girl I went to high school with put something like, I can either drive and be distracted and stressed and them screaming, or they can watch an iPad, and that just always stuck with me, because I didn't have kids at the time. And I was like, well, yeah, it'd be nice to not have your kids staring at an iPad for a car trip. And
Right.
again, people who don't have kids, I would never want to judge parents if I didn't have kids.
Yeah.
We just shouldn't judge anybody ever, even if you do have kids, but whatever. But yeah, and so that always stuck with me. I mean, this is like a decade ago, even maybe. And I thought, yeah, it can be a useful tool. It can be something where it can, I really need to go to the bathroom, or I need to make dinner. And for my example, my husband travels a lot for work. And so
Mhm.
I generally have a no screen time policy on school nights. Well, Monday through Friday, I guess I should say, um, but that sometimes goes out the window when I've had a really
Sure.
stressful day and the kids are amped up or needing some extra attention, and we can all just kind of sit together and we do we keep bringing up Bluey, but do the Bluey dance together, and
Yeah.
we talk about the things that are going on, and that's okay too. So I want to make sure that we're very, very clear, like, do not beat yourself up about the amount of screen
Right.
time your kids get. It's very specific and individualized to your family and your needs.
For sure. And I think it goes in seasons too. You have a new baby at home, you're going to probably, for your toddler, have more screen time than previous, and that's okay. It's summer. We're going to cut back on our screen time because we have more ability to be outside and those sorts of things. It's winter. Maybe we're going to, make family movie night more of a thing that we do because we can't go outside and everyone's kind of pulling their hair out and those sorts of things.
Yes.
Somebody is ill or under the weather or something like that. Okay, we're just going to be more flexible with it and strive to do the best that we can. And maybe we'll say, okay, it feels like we're watching a little too many screens or playing too many video games, and everybody is getting a little wired from that. Let's
Yeah.
scale back, and then we scale back. I think
Yeah.
that's very reasonable. And the more that you can be consistent with it, the easier it will be on your kids too. When it comes to, here's how we usually do screen time. My kids know that on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings, they can turn a show on in the morning when they come down from waking up. But on school days, we don't do that. And so it just becomes a habit, and there's not fighting over it because you're just used to doing what you're used to doing, and they get comfortable with, oh, it's a school day. Okay, so I'm not even going to ask about watching a show, because the 17 times before that I asked, the answer was no, because it's a school day, versus on the weekends when then we can just watch shows.
Sure. Consistency. Yeah. And consistency can be very helpful just generally in setting those boundaries and a number of things, even outside of screens. And so it certainly applies
Yeah.
there as well. Yeah. Excuse me. So I was wondering, because peer pressure is such a thing, right? So
Mhm.
how do we help educate our children? What have you seen that's been helpful in these conversations for parents to have for the children who want to fit in with their peers, who have social media access, who have their own smartphones, like how do we talk about the implications of anxiety, bullying, body image, all of
Right.
those things that you mentioned earlier?
It's really hard for parents when the parents that their children are around on a regular basis have made that decision that yes, my 12-year-old, my 9-year-old, my 14-year-old, my whatever-year-old can have an iPhone and have pretty unrestricted access, or much more access than I would ever feel comfortable granting my child. That makes it really hard. And so I think first and foremost, if you can convince other parents that are in your social sphere, let's make a plan together to wait until 8th grade or something like that. That will just certainly help if most of the people are on board with that. And then the outliers are the ones that are giving them early, rather than the outliers are the ones that are withholding. Having said that, it usually doesn't work out that way. And usually you're dropped in and all of the 5th graders have their iPhones or something along those lines. And you're the one saying, well, I don't know if that's the best for you. And so what I try and teach parents is, well, first and foremost, explain the why, and explain it in ways that your child can understand. Talking about addiction, talking about age appropriate issues with body image, bullying, those sorts of things in language that they can understand and that they can relate to, and saying, hey, the reason that we are not doing this is because there's a lot of unsafe things that are available on TikTok and on Facebook and those sorts of things. And I'm looking out for your best interest. And it's probably an ongoing conversation that you're going to have and be prepared to have with them, in the same way that you would not let a 4-year-old play with a box of matches, but you would probably let a 12-year-old help build a campfire. There's levels of supervision and freedom and autonomy that you're going to grant as they get older. And so explaining it in a way like that, like there's dangerous things on here, there's unsafe things on here. I am going to slowly over time give you more access and show you some of the downsides and things to worry about. I think that's the way to approach it with families, because it's an ongoing conversation that they're going to come up against a lot. And you can do that without having to make concessions or give in, but it's going to take a consistent approach that you're on board with. And that if you have a partner that they're on board with too, that this is the party line, that we're not going to have phones until 8th grade. Now, how can we communicate in the meantime? Well, we can make a plan. We can let somebody borrow our phone. We can make a plan for somebody to use a phone. We can get a little watch sort of thing, like a Gab or a Gizmo or something like that. Those are other options that you can explore if you want your child to be able to contact you or text you or those sorts of things. There's ways around that without giving them an iPhone with no screen time settings or unrestricted access.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's so funny to think about, growing up in the late 80s wouldn't be appropriate for me. I was 4. So the 90s, I don't think.
Yeah, we're the same age.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think I was running around too much at 4. So in the 90s, and it was like, okay, you can go to this person's house or this person's house, but that person's house is too far. So see you at lunch, or see you.
Right.
And certainly they would have the phone number of the parents of the house that we were going to, but we weren't necessarily at the house. We were out in the creek or running around. And so it's interesting to want kids to have that freedom, but also we do have the luxury of being able to know exactly where they all are at all times. And so figuring out kind of those things, like I don't know what it's actually called, a burner phone, but I don't know how to say that in a not
no, that's a fine word for a fine term for it, like a track phone or a Gab watch or
jitterbug
Gizmo,
or whatever.
any of those.
And then those watches that they have for children, so that you still have the opportunity to access if they need anything. Certainly if there is an issue, especially because people don't really have house phones anymore, to be able to track, but also not having just like, okay, here's an iPad, go after it. Here's a computer basically in the palm of your hand.
Right, exactly. I think there's a happy medium in there, but it takes some work to figure out what that is. But you have to be really committed to, okay, this is important because we know all the downsides of phones. We know how addictive they are. We know about bullying and body image and those sorts of things. And so we're going to be strong and we're going to resolve regardless of what other people are doing. We're committed to this and we're going to see it through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, my kids are so young right now, but it is something that really does give me pause, because I mean, we talk about the body images and the things that, of course, we grew up in the aughts of the Victoria's Secret era, where, if you weren't 6 feet tall and super skinny, then you're doing it wrong. And so we hope for a world where, and certainly that does still exist, whereas there is certainly more representation in the media, social media, in stores. Those messages are still there very much on TikTok and Instagram and everything. And so it's trying to find a way, yeah, like you said, to be able to express it in a way that's meaningful for the children, like depending on what age they're at, of this is going to be helpful for you to have a better worldview and being understanding of, your living your life the best way that you know how, versus trying to do that in a way that compares you to other people. Plus, my gosh, I really honestly can't imagine going through junior high with Twitter. Like, no, thank you.
Right.
I remember
Right.
some of the rumors. I still remember some of the rumors that went around in junior high in the late 90s, and that was by word of mouth. So I can only
Right.
imagine if it was plastered on Twitter or a social media page of some sort.
I mean, I still find the negative comments hard to read on my own social media as a 37, 38-year-old.
Yeah.
And so like, and I don't take them very seriously and I don't give them much thought, but I give them more thought than the positive ones. And so I can't imagine what a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old seeing these negative things written about them, how they would experience that and the impact that that would have. Because sometimes I'm still thinking about it later in the day. I'm like, why did they say that? Is that true? Or, like those things bother me despite, having a fully-ish developed brain and self-image and all those sorts of things, that those things still bother me. So I can't imagine what it would do to somebody that is at a much more vulnerable age and much more susceptible to criticism and all the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's rough out there. I will agree with you on that too. Sometimes the negative comments, and people are like, don't read don't read the trolls, don't read the negative. But it's nice to be able to look and be like you said, oh, do I need to think about saying that in a different way? Do I need, and then also sometimes people are just hateful. Like I've gotten on my YouTube channel, some people thumbs down something where I was like, my daughter got her cast off today. I'm like, well, you're just being a troll if you
Right. There's
are
lots of
thumbs
that for
downing
sure.
something that's inherently positive, for sure. So,
Right.
uh, well, that's good to know. And I know we already talked about a little bit, kind of talking about this boundary setting tips for parents. I did want to pivot a little bit, because you've talked a lot about, on your Instagram page, a lot about tips for dealing with tantrums, meltdowns, different behavioral moments for people. And I know even kind of across the age span, and I'd love to hear some more of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I really like talking about tantrums and meltdowns because I think that parents often lose a lot of sleep and a lot of joy from those years between 1.5 and 5, because they're facing a lot of tantrums and meltdowns, and it can be hard on parents to enjoy the in between when it just feels like meltdown after meltdown after meltdown. Through my time as a father and pediatrician, I've kind of shifted some of my strategies and tactics. And I think that everybody is constantly like evolving as a parent of what's
Yes.
working, what feels good, what seems to be the right way to do things. And if you're doing things the exact same way that your parents did it, or the exact same way that you did it a year ago, then you probably aren't growing much. And so my general strategies for parents when it comes to toddlers and meltdowns, I've come up lately with a few different acronyms that have really served people well. There's 3 that I'll just talk through because I think they're kind of fun and helpful. LEAP is one, LEAP, which is listen, empathize, acknowledge the problem, propose a solution. And so that works really well for any age person that you're talking with, from child to your spouse or boss or anyone. Listen to and try and get an understanding of where they're coming from. Empathize, show them that you get it. Acknowledge the problem, whether or not you think it's real, legitimate, or worthy of the tantrum that's being displayed. And then you can propose a solution. You can't solve their problems for them, but you might be able to propose a solution or a way to help them through it while they're, kind of in the weeds, red brain, and not able to see that. So LEAP is one. One that just came to me recently from a friend was Q-tip, which this one actually I like because we always talk in medicine about not putting Q-tips in your ears. I was like,
Yes.
well, this is a Q-tip that you should have in your ear, which is Q-tip, which is quit taking it personally. And I think this is something where parents get stuck a lot is,
Yes.
why are they doing this to me? Why do they hate me? Why am I, why are they treating me so poorly? And the more that you can quit taking it personally, the more you're going to be able to move through it. You're going to be able to hear them, help them acknowledge that and move through that, realizing that it's not you. It's just that it's the circumstances, it's the context, it's the bad day that you didn't realize that your 2.5-year-old had because something went afoul that you weren't aware of. Or that they're just tired or hungry or feeling disconnected or whatever it might be.
The system upgrade where they're 3.5 and lying is a new chapter of their brain unlocking a secret power. And it's like, stop lying to me. Why are you lying? And then it's like, oh, but it's a good thing because developmentally.
Yes, exactly. Yep. It's like, so that's the Q-tip. The Q-tip is the Q-tip that you want on your ears. Quit taking it personally. And just reminding yourself of that every time that it feels like you're taking it very personally, you're seeking justice, you're wanting them to be more grateful for everything that you've given them and done for them. It's just quit taking it personally. And then the last I just came up with this weekend on my Instagram stories is, let's see, I have to remember the acronym now. MTFO. Move the F on. And so that is, instead of lingering on the crime, instead of trying to seek justice for what is in front of you, instead of making them understand in that moment and learning their lesson and having it sink in, because it's not going to sink in no matter how strongly you try and word the message or try and seek that justice in the moment. It's not going to sink in. So the best thing to do is move on. And then what you can do is later on you can circle back and say, hey, earlier you were really upset and you threw the TV remote, and that's we can't throw the TV remote, and here's why we can't do that. Or earlier really upset and you tried to hit your sister. Well, we can't do that, but here's what we can do next time we're upset, or something along those lines, rather than trying in the moment to get punishment, justice, make them say sorry, all those sorts of things that nobody can do when they're in that red brain. Even us adults, when we're in the midst of an argument with a loved one or a coworker or something like that, like you need time to move on and then circle back rather than trying to have it all said and done at that moment.
Yes. Yeah, that is also a very good one for adults as well, where it's like, no, I'm gonna do this until it gets solved. And it's like, sometimes it's good to walk away and take a breath and reassess at a later time. Those are fantastic. Yeah, I'm definitely
thank you.
Gonna have to keep those in mind, because I think those are something that I always love an acronym anyway, but things that can be helpful. The taking it personally one is it is so difficult, because again, sorry to loop back to social media, but because there's this, and God bless Pinterest, I don't blame them, but like the Pinterest mom of it all, of like this perfect persona that so many people put on their social media pages of their parenting. And so there's this expectation of like, well, if you're a better parent, your child will just love you more. And it's like, no, that's not right. That's genuinely not what it is. They really are unlocking, saying no. They're taking different steps and developing certain things. And while it is frustrating, and certainly I will be the first person who it can be humiliating in public when your children are both running opposite directions from you at the swimming pool. That was me yesterday. And you're like, come back, nobody come back. And everyone's watching. They're not doing it to humiliate you, though it certainly feels humiliating. And so being able to be kind of don't want to be cliche, but like, you get to be the adult in that moment. And well,
and I think even things like even things like that, like it feels like all eyes are on you. This happened to us at church a few weeks ago when our 4-year-old just decided, like, we were going up to receive communion, and she just sat down in the middle aisle and wouldn't do anything. It was literally the middle of the aisle. And I just had to carry her back out.
Yes.
Most people have so much on their plates and so much on their minds that they will not remember that.
Right.
By the time you walked out of church, let alone later in the day, or they're not thinking about it, or talking about it over dinner. They've moved on because they have a bunch of other things on their plate that are taking up their time. So it is not anything to them. And if you can just move on from that too and say, well, I would never remember somebody doing that because I've probably seen that and have been so distracted by my own kids that I didn't even notice it. So the likelihood that they remember that or think poorly of that is actually very low.
Yeah, well, you know what? And also for me, I'm always just like Hunger Games salute to somebody mentally, like, yep, been there,
Yeah.
feel you. And then
Right.
another thing with that too is one of my favorite David Rose quotes of all times is like, it's something like, no one thinks about, oh no, sorry, it was Alexis Rose. Nobody thinks about you like you think about you. Like you
Oh,
are
for
the
sure.
one who internalizes all of that. You are aware of your worldview. And exactly like you said, like somebody may have driven been like, that 4-year-old is sitting in the middle of the line for communion. And immediately then it's like, I forgot to put the pot roast in for dinner tonight. Like it's
Right, exactly. Like they've moved on before you even have gotten out the back door.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I was curious because you do talk about it a lot. Like, how do you proactively in a medical setting address mental health concerns for your patients? Because though I do believe that the stigma of mental health is certainly decreasing, the awareness of the importance of it is increasing, there is sort of a gap still in some of that access. And it seems like that's really important to you in your practice.
Yes, I think that in the pediatric setting, pediatricians are in a very good position to be on the front line of catching mental health things because most people don't go straight to a therapist if their child is having a tough time.
Mhm.
They'll kind of limp along and then they get to their annual checkup or something like that. And then hopefully they'll fill out one of those forms. I mean, sometimes parents get overwhelmed by the number of forms and everything like that that
Sure.
we have. And so then you just get all these circles of yes, yes, yes. And you're like, are you sure you marked paying attention when you marked yes for this?
Right.
But oftentimes that's where it comes to first attention that there's something going on mental health wise, whether it be anxiety, depression, bullying, self-esteem, body image, those sorts of things, hopefully get uncovered by your pediatrician. In a typical practice, that's once a year. And that's just the sports physical annual checkup sort of thing.
Right.
And I find that if we let things get to that once a year checkup, that there's not a lot of time to go through and deep dive into that. And a lot can happen in a year where we're having a lot of issues that we might miss. And so the way that we do that in our practice is every quarter we send out a mental health screening tool, a GAD-7 and a PHQ-9, which screens for anxiety and for depression. And we send that out to parents and say, hey, here's the link, hand your kid their phone, and let them fill this out. We keep a close eye on their mental health and we want to be proactive, catch things before they get out of hand, catch things before something brings you into our office because you're so concerned or so worried about them, or something even worse happens. We want to be proactive about that. And so that is how we proactively handle mental health from a surveillance perspective. And then we talk about it on a regular basis when we're in the exam room, that it's part of the physical, it's part of the history that we're getting is how are things going with friends? How is your mood? Are you feeling overwhelmed or stressed out? Are you feeling down or depressed? Things like that that they hear on a regular basis so that they know that when things come up, this is a practice that we can turn to take the next steps of, yeah, I have been feeling really overwhelmed, or I've been feeling really down and I've been having trouble sleeping. Those things, oh, okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit more. I think those are the main ways that we are able to be a little bit more proactive mental health wise because we have more time and we can do things differently. And the reason that you can't do this in a typical practice is because insurance won't pay for it. Insurance won't pay for a quarterly check-in or text message to see how they're doing, or
Right.
getting those forms filled out on a regular basis. And so it becomes impractical for practices to do that when insurance doesn't reimburse and it's costing staff time and all those sorts of things. And so we don't have to deal with that. So it makes it really nice for us to just, how can we serve our patients best? And that's regular check-ins.
Yes, I mean, everything you said is so beautiful. And I'm constantly encouraging parents on this show and certainly on Instagram, wherever I can, that if you have questions that to advocate for your children, right? To be able to say like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And being able to say
Totally.
like, to ask questions and reach out and feel it can be an uncomfortable conversation because mental health these days is still considered kind of taboo, but nevertheless, you being able to take that step and be uncomfortable to be able to say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do to help my child. And you're not, air quotes, bothering anybody if you do reach out, and certainly then your medical provider can help point you in the right direction of a mental health professional or whatever service you may need.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, I feel like I could talk to you for another couple hours. Maybe I'll bother you to come back on another time, but I
That'd be
thank
great.
you so much for this important conversation where we talk about giving ourselves grace. We talk about consistency and the importance of setting boundaries for our children. And again, I'm going to say it again, to give ourselves grace and not be judgmental about ourselves. So thank you so much for all of that. Where can the listeners find you?
My main place is Instagram. And
Mhm.
so it's just at Phil Boucher MD on Instagram is where I do most of my content and
Great.
put things together. And if you're, I mean, obviously, if you're local in Lincoln, Nebraska, and you're looking for a pediatrician, our practice is called Frontier Pediatric Care. But I do most of my content on Instagram, and that's where I like to spend my time teaching about pediatrics and parenting and all those things.
Yes, and if you are not following Dr. B, go follow Dr. B. Obviously, I'm obsessed. So anyway, well, thank you again so much for this, and I will be sure to put all that in the show notes. If anybody's listening is like, wait, what was that again? It'll be in the show notes. And for everybody out there, be curious, not judgmental.